Hello, I'm Dr. Joe Arminio. In this video, I want to show you how you can maximize your high school son or daughter's Model Congress experience and how you can maximize your return on investment. Have you ever experienced a son or daughter rushing up to you wanting to go to a Model Congress conference? If you haven't, get ready, because it's like being hit by a hurricane. These Model Congress conferences, the big ones, the multi-day affairs, create tremendous excitement in the participants, and no wonder. These are often taking place on prestigious college campuses like Harvard or Yale, or at some great American city like Washington, D.C. or San Francisco. Or they take place in some historical location like Williamsburg, a conference that might be held at William and Mary. And the participants know they're going to be one of hundreds of others. All these youth descending on this conference, all the friendships they're going to make, it's heady stuff. And not only that, they're going in and simulating the government. They're going to come in as a U.S. senator or a congressman or a congresswoman. You can see why they look forward to this with such excitement and bring such passion to it. It's hard to say no to them. But then you look at the cost and the hidden costs. Well, the financial cost might be upwards of $1,000. By the time you deal with room and board, to and fro transportation, the simulation tuition itself, it's that expensive. And what about the time commitment? These often stretch over 3 or 4 days. Your son or daughter are going to drop everything they're doing for 4 days, plus what they spend before that conference takes place. So the question arises, several questions arise. Is it really worth it? And is there a way to get even more out of it? And the answer to both questions is an emphatic yes. It's worth it if you can find a way to get even more out of it. And I'm going to share with you how you can get more out of these otherwise wonderful Model Congress conferences. Well, first let's see what's really involved. What's going to happen at these, I call these parliamentary maneuver Model Congresses. And that speaks to one of the big things that the participants are going to come away with. They're going to learn how to push a bill through Congress. And that's tremendously important. That's a very important part of one's civics education. They've been reading about this to some degree in their history courses, in their government studies courses. They're going to actually experience it. They're going to rehearse it and do it many times over from multiple angles. Something else is going to happen, and that is a tremendous boost, I might even say an explosion in their confidence. Their confidence as public speakers. They're going to be moving from committee to committee, moving among the caucuses, finding out what it's like to be a leader, and most importantly of all, holding forth in front of many, perhaps even hundreds of their peers. It's the kind of experience they will never forget. And they can finally say, I got up, I said something important, I did it. It's priceless, what comes from that. Now, other things come from these conferences too, but not as much as you might think. Their knowledge of public policy, the way the government's handling big issues, that really is incidental. I'm not going to learn that much from that. And the actual specific critical thinking technique and public speaking technique that they're going to come away with, not that much more either. Now, why is it that they're not going to learn that much more about public policy? That it's not much more about learning how a bill is pushed through. Why is that the case? Well, at first you think that can't be. I mean, after all, these are free for all. These events give you free rein. You can come in and take any position on any issue, push any legislation you want. And the student thinks, oh my God, the sky's the limit, until they realize they don't know very much about public policy. They don't know even where to begin. And so what typically happens is they don't aim very high at all, and they come in with some inconsequential bill or other. And their peers do the same. Oh yes, they're learning a little bit about this and a little bit about that, but it's not really coherent and it's not really substantive. And so what happens is, when it comes to public policy and the workings of government on the grand scale to deal with really important issues, what happens is they really are presented with a grab bag of disconnected, superficial fragments of knowledge. And then in terms of the public speaking and the critical thinking, usually what happens is they may be members of a Model Congress club. And there's a facilitator, but the facilitator doesn't know that much about public policy or that much about thinking and speaking technique. And they act more as a disciplinarian. Make sure they do some research, they show up on time. But to a large degree, students are left on their own preparing for these Model Congress conferences. And that's a shame. So is it really worth it? Is there a way to enhance this? Is there a practical, relatively inexpensive, in fact, rather inexpensive way to make this extravagant, I would think, expensive junket worth it? Yes, there is. And I'll give you two words to begin with. Classical forensics. Now, forensics is that word that means the art of argumentative discourse. Classical forensics, that is the art of argumentative discourse that the Greeks and the Romans imparted to their youth and that prepared their youth to become, what, not just leaders, but ultimately the builders of civilization. And this method has been passed down for several thousand years. So you want to find something that imparts this, the classical forensics. Is it being imparted in the schools? Well, I've got a video that goes into this and explains really it's not, and really more about what classical forensics is. I don't want to spend too much time on classical forensics per se, but I do want to draw this distinction. What's being offered intracurricular in the normal school day really doesn't offer much of any thinking and speaking technique. There is something offered that is extracurricular. A lot of schools offer a club or clubs that involve themselves in speech and debate competitions. And you'll get more technique there, but you'd be surprised, not that much more. And so what happens is you're not really getting as much as you could be getting, and I call this other kind of forensics conventional forensics, to distinguish it from the classical forensics, which is very attainable, very manageable, very enjoyable for the adolescent to acquire, but which typically is not available. But if you could only get that classical forensics before they go into this expensive multi-day event, they could get so much more out of that event. So exactly how do you get this classical forensics training in advance of the event? Well, the first thing to look for is what I'm calling a new kind of Model Congress. This new kind of Model Congress could also be called a public policy Model Congress. It's not a political or a parliamentary maneuver Model Congress. It's not emphasizing what the present-day well-established Model Congress conferences are emphasizing. No, it's emphasizing content, substance, policy, big problems, present-day problems the government's facing right now. We're talking about major civic engagement if you participate in such an event. And further good news here, these events are not expensive. They're online, so there's almost no cost at all. They're 1 day, not 4 day. There's not a big build up to it. They do provide pre-conference briefings to bring momentum, so the student brings significant momentum into the event. And I have other videos that talk about this new kind of Model Congress conference. So it does a lot of things, and so this new kind, or this public policy emphasized Model Congress conference, is a catalyst. It gets them ready in a substantial way for that multi-day affair. It's some distance from home. And from that conference, they can come away with some very serious legislation and know a lot about it, and take that, port that into, it's very portable, take that into this multi-day, multi-Congress conference. Now, something else I think should be done before you send your son or daughter to the big event, that is, they should be getting some classical forensics, critical thinking, and speaking technique. They should be getting some training in that way. Now, they're going to, if they participate in what I'm calling the new kind of Model Congress conference, they're going to get some of that training. Now, a lot of that is actually dealing with the product itself. You've gotten the training in advance, and then you actually try it out, practice it in these public policy Model Congress conferences. But what would be good, too, is to get some other substantive thinking and speaking training in addition to practicing it in this new kind of Model Congress conference. And so if you do all that, I think you're really going to make good use of that multi-day expensive affair. Now, there's another thing to mention here. A lot of students want to go not just to one of these expensive affairs, they want to go to 2 or 3 or 4 in a year. I don't know about that. As a parent, I might think twice and say, you know what might make more sense? Let me send my son or daughter to one of these, maybe at most 2, maybe in their entire high school career, 2 or 3. But let me send them to this new kind, this public policy emphasized Model Congress conference where they also emphasize critical thinking and speaking, where they practice it, and let me spend some time getting them into that classical forensics thinking and speaking training. Let me do that in lieu of sending them to 1 or 2 additional expensive Model Congress conferences. That may make a lot more sense. And something else to keep in mind. Remember, your student is going to be highly motivated to attend that multi-day affair. And so why don't you harness that excitement, that passion, ground them in the thinking and speaking technique, and give them a place to practice that in a substantial way. I'm talking about a new kind of Model Congress conference before you send them off. And so I might say maybe one of these expensive Model Congress conferences a year would suffice, and then you have these others preparing the ground, this training and these much, much less expensive affairs preparing the ground, acting as catalysts. And then I think you've really got a substantial program. Not only that, I think you can go to college admissions and make quite the case. Look what I did to prepare my son's thinking and speaking abilities, to prepare him for future leadership, to prepare him for, ground him more deeply in civics. Look what I did. At the same time, I think your son or daughter will thank you, and it just could be that you've also helped prepare the next great American leader, whether it's in politics or maybe in business or science, academia. This kind of training is very, very portable. It carries. And the Greeks and the Romans knew that. And that's why they stressed classical forensics. And I think that's why you should too. That combined with these multi-Congress, expensive and very elaborate multi-Congress conferences is a fantastic 1-2 punch.